Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EBA Virtual Safety Summit 2021. I'm Johan Glans. I'm part-time with the EBA Secretariat and have the privilege of being your host for today's sessions. The plan was for all of us to meet in Cologne over these 2 days, and as you probably are too well aware of, we recently decided to change it to a online virtual setting, and in relationship to that, I would like to offer the EBA thanks to our sponsors, Bombardier, Dassault, and Gulfstream for their continued support and following us from a physical to a virtual session. Also, to all of those moderators, speakers, and panelists that also stuck with us and managed to change their agendas to do a virtual setting rather than the one in Cologne, and as well to our staff members who's been hardworking in a very, very short time making a virtual event possible. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. As you've noticed, your cameras and apparently there is some audio thing. I'll just continue, or if this doesn't work, Karina will step in. Anyway, cameras automatically turned off, and your microphones are off. So to interact with the panelists and moderators, there are two functions. You have the Q&A, where you can post your questions that are visible only to the panelists and moderator, or you can use the chat function, which is viewable by everyone. The sessions will also be recorded, video and audio. So with that housekeeping done, I would like to hand over to Jürgen Wiese, the EBA Chairman of the Board of Governors, to open the EBA Safety Summit 2021.
Thank you, Johan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to open this year's edition of the EBA Safety Summit, although unfortunately in a virtual setting for the second year in a row. The EBA Secretariat has been closely monitoring the situation around Europe, and also with the support of the Board of Governors, has decided that the most responsible decision was not organizing a physical event. The health and well-being of the attendees, the speakers, and the organizing team remain our highest priorities, particularly in such a close proximity to the end of the year holiday. However, I'm happy to see that we are joined by such a large number of aviation professionals, even in a virtual setting. And I would like to take this opportunity again to thank our long-term sponsors, here only in alphabetical orders, no precedence, Bombardier, Dassault, and Gulfstream, for making this event possible. Our speakers for their availability and flexibility and support, and of course, all of you in the audience for making the time in your undoubtedly busy schedules to connect with your peers. Maintaining an unmediated contact with the business aviation community is a key element of overcoming any challenges, be it in times of normal operations, as well as in times of crisis, as we have right now. The fact, or as we hope to emerge from right now, the fact that so many of you have joined us today, despite moving from a much expected physical event to a virtual setting on such short notice, has once again confirmed our industry commitment to going. Underline that I'm also very happy once again with us throughout the event in Cologne nearby. We are proud of building a stronger bond with the EU. We will hear a bit later from EASA's Executive Director, Patrick Key, who, despite not being able to join us today due to a conflicting schedule, has kindly agreed to record a message. The recovery from the COVID-19 crisis has underlined the need for demonstrating resilience and implementing operational excellence principles. Best practices, how to manage the impact of the pandemic on operations, have been shared between the members throughout the pandemic and through the members of the Safety Committee. Challenges being discussed in the Safety Committee openly, and approaches and potential solutions have been offered without delay to the membership and the industry. This stronger bond and increased level of trust within the operators community has encouraged EBA to facilitate the first confidential sharing session, aptly named Safe Share by one of EBA's Safety Committee valued members. And within this session tomorrow, open to all operator members, we will give the floor to the participants for sharing concerns, challenges, and lessons learned, all under the presumption of what happens in this virtual room will stay in the virtual room. This is a very important principle. I will now invite Stan Medved, Chairman of the EBA Safety Committee and Director of Aviation at Shell Aircraft, to take the floor and share his views on practices and lessons learned during the pandemic, applied into achieving and maintaining operational excellence. I hope that the contents of this Safety Summit will be relevant to all of you, and thank you for being open-minded and sharing your experience. I wish all of you a continued safe operations and a peaceful holiday season. Over to you, Stan.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the EBAA Safety Committee, I'd just like to extend our warm welcome, and really pleased to see so many of you joining. Now, obviously, as Jürgen has said, we would much prefer to have been able to do this in a face-to-face setting, but as a safety-minded organisation, we really had very little choice, and I think this was the right decision to go virtual for this event, and also very encouraged to see so many of you here. I mean, COVID has presented all of us, and certainly our sector, an incredible number of challenges, and at the same time as challenges in our own industry and sector, we're being faced with challenges in our normal day-to-day lives with our families and friends, and just getting on with living. So it's been an unprecedented time for us. COVID has also presented our sector with some pretty unique challenges, and opportunities as well. And in the Safety Committee, we've spent the past 18 to 20 months looking at the challenges, also how we can respond, and the response that business aviation has been able to provide have shown how resilient and how capable and flexible our sector is. And as a result, we're seeing business aviation as being seen as a safe haven. So many people that have not been able to travel otherwise have turned to business aviation, and we've seen a real surge in activity, as the Eurocontrol data has shown since the summer this year. This surge in activity is also presenting us with some additional, and in some cases, new risks that we may not have anticipated before. The theme for this summit is operational excellence. And what does operational excellence mean? It pretty much means everything that we do, we're striving to do it as best we can, learn from our experiences and how we can best apply them in solving, meeting the challenges and solving the problems that we face. What it does do, and it's shown us certainly during COVID, it gives us resilience to operate and deal with the challenges, and it gives us the ability to adapt and even in some cases reinvent ourselves. I know a number of aircraft operators are doing operations in quite a different way since prior to the pandemic. What we've also seen is that we've been doing things in a different way, and we've adopted some new processes, new procedures driven by operational excellence. And what we'd like to see is, what do we want to keep as we come out of COVID. We're doing things differently, and we had to do them differently out of necessity. But some of the things we've done and we've learnt to adapt will serve us well going into the future once this pandemic is behind us. What we have ahead of us over the next afternoon and tomorrow, we've got some interesting sessions planned, which are going to look at a number of different elements of operational excellence. And a lot of it comes from being able to share information openly and freely without any fear of recrimination or reprisal. And we certainly find within the EBAA Safety Committee, we do find that open communication, and we want to extend that openness to all our members to be able to share their experiences, lessons, learnings, and concerns. And we have that session tomorrow, which I'm really looking forward to. What I really do hope, and the committee hopes, that you'll be able to take something away, even if it's only one piece of operational excellence. And this will actually help you drive in your journey towards operational excellence, because what we really believe is that operational excellence can and will deliver exceptional safety outcomes for our sector of the industry. So again, thank you for joining us, and I really look forward to the next 2 days at this summit.
Thank you so much for those opening words, Jürgen and Stan. And I would now like to introduce Patrick Key, Executive Director of EASA, who was supposed to deliver a keynote speech in Cologne, but we now have a video recording since the agenda was changed and his press time schedule did not fit a physical appearance here online.
Welcome to this important event dealing with business aviation safety. These are difficult times for the entire aviation industry, and as you know, there is a high uncertainty on how and when we'll get out of the crisis. Business aviation did extremely well in general during the crisis, in terms of traffic in particular. Business aviation was able to show its flexibility, versatility, reliability, which were and are and will be key in demanding times. In terms of sales, I understand that the situation is challenging as always, but I have great hope that when the economic situation stabilizes again, the market will respond in a very positive manner to what business aviation offers. In terms of safety, the business aviation sector is doing very well with very few accidents in the EASA states in the last 10 years. But the biggest risk in safety is complacency. And we should not forget that all actors need to be vigilant and that safety should never be taken for granted. In particular, COVID times have generated a new set of risks which have been identified in the EASA RNO project. I believe that there will be a discussion on this during this event. But these risks are linked to the currency of competencies for all actors of aviation, pilots, maintenance engineers, air traffic controllers, ground handlers, and so on and so forth. Also, new operational patterns arose during this crisis, such as direct routes creating new operational constraints. And finally, now that we are preparing to come back to a more normal situation, capacity will be a challenge again. We are also in EASA investing into innovative technologies and operational procedures, and we know that business aviation has always been at the forefront of innovation. The goal is to allow for more and safer access to airport platforms for business aviation, further strengthening the operational efficiency and flexibility of the sector. We are, for example, working on reduced runway landing distance and enhanced flight vision system, as well as on enhanced minimum crew operations. We are also, in parallel to rulemaking, working extensively on what we call safety promotion. You will receive, I believe, in the next minutes, more information on this very important initiative. We want to continue to support you and EBAA in maintaining your professional excellence. I would like to thank EBAA for the quality of their relationship with us and thank them for organizing this event. And I hope that we will be able to welcome you in Cologne next year. I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you for those words. Now it's time to move over to our first session. Which is State of Safety, presentation by EASA, where we have Dominique Renaud, the section manager for business jets at EASA, and also John Franklin, head of safety promotion at EASA. Welcome.
Hi, Johan. It's John here. Thanks for the invite.
Hi, John.
Hopefully you can hear and see me. Let's maybe just check first that we can see Dominique as well.
Dominique, you're still muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Welcome. I'm really looking forward to listening to your presentation. You have the floor.
So thank you. So we will share this presentation together with John. Before I start, maybe just to introduce a bit myself and where I'm locating within the agency. So I'm the head of the business jet sections team, taking care of the product certifications of design changes and type certifications of business jet aircraft. So I'm glad today to present to you, to give you a bit of highlight of what is the state of safety for business aviation. And I will share the presentation with John to make it a bit dynamic. And I will start describing the three key challenges that we would like to address here. So the first challenge is how to manage operations safely and taking the risk to an acceptable level. Then I will go through the implementing the EASA rules as simply and effectively as possible. And then we will go through how EASA has been supporting the business aviation community and supporting the growth of aviation in a sustainable way through all the activity of safety promotion.
So for the first part of this, then I'm just going to show you a couple of the statistics, and obviously you've seen, hopefully most of you have seen me talk about this at previous events, and I think it's particularly interesting that normally, well, in the past we've had ourselves from our strategy and management directorate talking about the data and things like that, but then also our colleagues from flight standards, and I think it's hopefully hugely beneficial to you as a community to get the input from Dominique's side, and you'll see in a second particularly how that's really relevant in terms of the activities we've got going on, particularly on the certification side, but in the wider agency activities in terms of the top key risk areas and the different accident outcomes we're trying to prevent. So what you see here on the graph on the left-hand side is the graph for fixed-wing commercial accidents for the past 10 years. Now, it's interesting that some of you might remember I've presented graphs like this just for the business aviation community in the past. And we're kind of almost at the point where those graphs are almost, well, we can't really make them at the moment, because the data shows kind of one or such a small number of accidents that actually looking at accidents and serious incidents just for the business aviation community is impossible, because the graph shows nothing, which is really positive in that sense. And when we look at the whole fixed wing commercial activity sector in general, in the last 10 years we've had 5 fatal accidents, then with 10 fatalities in that context, and then in the sense of the non-fatal, 15 non-fatal and 55 serious incidents. So the numbers we see are relatively low, and I think this is where particularly it highlights the importance of learning from the wider data set. And one of the first kind of activities we had in the safety review to do that is this introduction of using the European risk classification score to look at the different, what we call key risk areas. For those of you in kind of, dare I say, ICAO, CAST ICAO Common Taxonomy Team occurrence category, it's effectively the replacement for the CSIT occurrence categories, on the basis that the CSIT occurrence categories aren't all accident outcomes. Some of them are, there's lots of different things there. So we use these key risk areas against the risk classification score in the graph on the right here to look at both the axis along the bottom here, we have the number of accidents and serious incidents. And here on the left hand side, we have the aggregated ERCS score. And what that starts to show us is kind of which accident outcomes are the most challenging. And I don't think this ever surprises anybody, but it's particularly good at highlighting, where we should be focusing some of our safety efforts. So what you see here on the kind of right side of that graph is aircraft upset. Then kind of just to the left, but slightly higher in terms of risk, runway excursions, and then airborne collisions, where we have a lower number of occurrences, but the relative risk is then higher. And then on the kind of lower side, we have a lower risk but a higher number of fire, smoke and pressurization events. And similarly, as you move kind of left and up slightly, then collisions on runway, and those kind of 5 key risk areas for the commercial fixed wing community in general is kind of what we see as some of the key challenges that we have. Now, this is where, particularly as we start to do more detailed analysis in the future, being able to, with the new ERCS now being approved and more authorities now starting to use this for all occurrences, being able to risk score occurrences that you report as organizations to the national authority will enable us, hopefully in the future, to show a much more meaningful data set for the business aviation community specifically. And for us, that's a really exciting step forward, and it would be really interesting as we move forward to be able to do more detailed analysis from our data set for the business community. And now Dominique's going to show kind of what that looks like then in a wider context in terms of key risk areas.
Yes, what I would like to describe here is where EASA is focusing on in terms of regulations, and also to address the safety, those safety risks. So maybe if you click one, yeah. So here, it was important for me to identify what are all the design features in which we are working on in terms of regulations, but as well in terms of certification to support the new design and what design organizations are putting in the market. So to address the risk that were identified previously by John, typically like introducing for runway excursions features such as the runway overrun awareness and alerting system, here written as ROAS, or enhanced flight vision systems, combined vision systems, the ADSB in as well, and other features like aircraft present positions on charts, and all those items that are contributing to enhanced safety and within the product certification. So, and what I will go maybe more in details in terms of mitigations on the regulations will be, I start with the next slide. Can you move to the next slide, please?
Sorry, slight technical problem. Fixed it.
Yeah, so in the implementing EASA rules, what I want to highlight here is that the EASA safety promotion team, but together with certifications and flight standard directorate, they are coordinating the support to business aviation to help implement new and updated rules, so that are specific for business aviations. And the reduced runway landing distance is one example of that. And then we went even beyond with landing distance, time of arrival, NPAs, facilitating as well certification of the enhanced flight vision system, the fuel management, language proficiency, effective safety management system implementations, and supporting as well flight crew training. So, yeah, so now in implementing the EASA rule, we introduced changes to the airworthiness code that are introduced by the NPA 2016. Addressing the runway overrun hazard, which is also known as LDTA, the landing distance at time of arrival, mainly aiming at giving a representative landing distance and consider smoother touchdown sync rate, and correlated with the wheel braking and coefficients and the runway coefficients. So, and among all the factors that are accounted, there is as well the aircraft configurations with the specific features using the head-up display cues, the environmental variability, for example, for the wind additives, and as well the runway slopes. So in anticipation of the NPA and the publication of the rules, the certification team already introduced in some AFM of certain AEM the supplementary LDTA supplemental to support this rule. So certification has been anticipated the rules through what we call CRIs, which are certification review items, which are tools to help us implementing the rules in advance. Continuing with implementing the rules, the CS AO is planned to be published somewhere next year to introduce a regulation related to the enhanced flight vision systems and combined vision systems operations. So, and we have been starting implementing the new regulations through interim certification review items, again, to support and to facilitate the certifications of this new design feature, EVS and CVS. So mainly aiming to provide a simpler and clearer requirement for the implementations of the head-up display, enhanced vision system and synthetic vision system, and as well for the approval of EVS and CVS capability. Addressing aircraft initial airworthiness, air traffic management and crew operational regulations for EVS and CVS. And those design features really aiming at enhancing the crew situational awareness for the type A approaches at a decision height 2,200 feet, and as well account for lower decision height for the type B approaches with credit at 100 feet, so-called EVSA. and as well allowing for the EAVS landing down to ground. So these design features will really improve the ground operational external visibility and awareness and obstacle and terrain awareness as well. In addition to the landing distance and time arrival and the EAVS certification that we are working on, there has been a new design features as well introduced in a business jet, major modifications. The ADS-B in is one of them, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, which is mandatory for instrument flight rule category aircraft, and really aiming at providing traffic alert and collision avoidance system. So to increase safety, situational awareness for airborne and surface traffic in combination with the TCAS2. So the other design feature is the aircraft present position on en route and approach chart, increasing as well the crew situational awareness and highlight deviation from the intended clear routing in delicate phases of flight, which is a complementary to the moving map and the primary navigation data. And the one other example I wanted to highlight is the introduction of new 2D and 3D airport moving map. We call them 2D, 3D AMM, aiming at enhancing the crew situational awareness as well in delicate taxi environment and low visibility operation, low visibility at takeoff. So basically, this is the main items that our certification teams are working on currently, and we are working as a facilitator for the OEM and design organization in certifying those new products and be ready for the future. And for the business aviation, it's important as with the flexibility that require the business aviations, those features would certainly reduce some crew workload and improve access to aerodrome, reduce the number of go around and also diverting. So that were the main items that I wanted to present to you and to highlight to the community.
And just to follow on as well, the other part that we were interested to share with you, and hopefully many of you have seen this already, and while we've called this activity a ramp-up campaign, actually what it is in reality is a kind of general, how do we help sustain operational excellence across the industry? So obviously we appreciate that there are many parts of the industry, particularly in many areas of business aviation, where it's not necessarily ramping up. It's, how do we, as particularly as the regulatory community and then with the wider industry, support each other with all the different situations that we find ourselves in. And that's really particularly in the context of business aviation, where the ramp up campaign was kind of focused particularly. So we launched this campaign in May with a package of white branded PowerPoints with posters like the one you see here, and we also have posters for maintenance and ramp and also for the ATM community. And basically what we provided in this campaign package was a set of behaviors and actions to support organizations discussing with their staff the different challenges they were facing and what people were going through, and really just to kind of open up these kinds of open conversations as to how do we get through whatever situation we find ourselves in. So it was more designed around normalizing conversations about different safety challenges rather than specifically completely focusing on the ramp up. And then in June, we had this EASA Safety Week to really try and promote the different activities that have been going on across all the different domains, We had a specific webinar that focused on the EASA safety issues report that we'd seen, and some of the work that the NAAs have been doing, and also with our wider community collaborative groups, to look at the different safety issues that we'd seen and to have a conversation about the different safety issues. And obviously, that's very different in different parts of the industry, even localized at different airports and countries. And one of the key parts of that conversation in Safety Week was really all about organizations really understanding what was the specific situation for them. And it's interesting, we're going to talk a lot about this in the panel that will follow very shortly, so hopefully that set that in some more context. So we did these different webinars and all of this material and everything around the campaign and the ramp up activity is in the Ercs community site. And if you go literally, you can just type EASA Ercs community site into Google and you'll find the community site. And on that homepage, then is the ramp up resources, and there's all sorts of different things there. Posters, we've got the presentations. Some of the key parts of the PowerPoints have also been translated into a number of different languages as well. So we've got all this material, and like I say, they're designed deliberately white branded, so you can add your own company's logo and just use them in your own activities. It's deliberately designed just to save people time. So one of the things we particularly, it's fairly obvious to everybody that COVID isn't over now, and whatever situations different parts of the industry finds itself in, in reality, we're going to be dealing with this kind of unknown, slightly evolving situation, probably understatement of the year there, for quite some time, and certainly well into 2022. And what we've done then is continued these conversations that we started in the ramp up campaign into something we call Conversation Aviation, which is it's split into 4 weekly cycles of webinars and different podcasts and things like that. So we've already covered Be Ready and Stay Safe, and we've been doing some sessions there. And then similarly, we'll continue these 4 weekly cycles into next year. And one of the key things we're trying to do with all of these conversations is, particularly when it comes to us collaborating as stakeholders, having an industry-wide campaign that sustains then, through these challenges is really important. The interconnected nature of the community is so important. One of there are so many classic sort of kind of very obvious examples that we've seen recently. There was one particularly with less less traffic for the ATM community. One example we saw was a number of operators telling us that they were trying to get their crews to do certain things. Let's take stabilized approaches and do all the right things on an approach, but as there's less traffic, controllers have been trying to be helpful and provide shortcuts and things like that. So there was one example there where we've seen at a number of places where without having positive conversations between the organisations flying in and the ATM community, so there is a common appreciation of, yes, shortcuts are great in certain circumstances, but there are also challenges with that on the flight crew for a stable approach, as just one example. Similarly on the ground, there are, we've seen lots of challenges, particularly in the side of ground handling, from all small. In fact, we had somebody as a guest on one of our video casts from a small airport who is the majority of their traffic is business aviation traffic, and the challenges they've had getting skilled ground staff to come back to aviation has been enormous. And he talked about some of the challenges where less than 50% of some of their ground posts were positions were filled, and obviously that knock-on effect into people like yourselves flying into airports like that. And the more we can kind of, let's say, normalize those conversations, particularly where you're impacted by, take the airport community and the ground handling community as a classic one, is how they rationalize their own startup strategies against what you need from them as a community providing a service to you. I think particularly there, that's been really, really interesting, is having discussions between ground handling and airport support services, where the level of service available can sometimes be really difficult, particularly in situations where you're trying to sustain your operational activity in the kind of ad hoc, quite flexible way. That's one of the huge benefits of business aviation to the people you provide your services to. But what does that mean then when all of a sudden the airport and ground handling community may not be ready in their own startup strategies? So again, it's having those conversations is really important, and then particularly supporting our staff wherever they are and whatever situation they find themselves in really focusing on those key behaviors. And this is where particularly this concept of being ready and staying safe was so important, and it almost becomes like we've seen in many of the video and podcasts we've had with lots of different people from across the industry, is that these 6 basic points, to be talking about those in organizations, again, whether you're ramping up, whether you're working at a much higher capacity than perhaps you were used to, is kind of keeping these 6 points in mind, we see has been kind of almost a really great foundation for practical safety in organizations. So, in terms of the being ready element, ensuring you have the right tools, equipment and infrastructure in place for what operations you're trying to do. And it's entirely feasible that you won't have everything that available for what you're trying to do, but then understanding what that means for the limitations on your organization or extra risks you might be carrying and who's carrying that risk is really important. And then we've heard a number of people particularly talk about having enough skilled, trained and qualified people, and then also those people who are operationally ready and fit for duty. And there's been lots of discussion about the well-being element. I think collectively as a global society, we've learned a lot about well-being and psychological safety and how that impacts human performance in the aviation community particularly, and we've been focusing a lot of efforts on helping people do that. And I think particularly this is where things like the peer support regulation and also all the activities around well-being. We have within our safety promotion toolkit a well-being resource hub that is particularly useful, hopefully designed for small organizations, that if you want well-being information put together by real experts, and it's been developed by the Royal Aeronautical Society's Human Factors Group, people from across the industry in our Human Factors Collaborative Analysis Group, and with the support of the psychology department at Trinity College in Dublin, who've ensured that this well-being resource hub is scientifically correct and available to anybody in the community for free, that you can share within your organizations. And again, on the Ercs community site, we have a part specifically with that well-being material, and there's information that you can share with your organizations that we think is really useful. And that's where that last bit is, putting staff and their well-being at the heart of a people say to ramp up. It's not just that well-being element I talk about, but also then just that thinking about all of these different people in lots of different circumstances. We know in some organizations people talk about there are some people who kind of expected to run 100 meters at the start of the pandemic. And I can imagine, particularly in some of your organizations, you've had a lot of people who've been doing a lot of things, and maybe they started trying to run 100 meters, but they've ended up running a marathon of 100 meters. And again, understanding what that means for people in organizations, and seeing how we can help and support that. And as I say, it's about how we can have open and honest conversations about how that impacts human performance and safety. It's not bad, in the sense that it's about having the conversation and being open, hopefully, to understanding what that means. And then particularly when it comes to staying safe, we talk a lot about encouraging people to follow recognized processes, procedures and practices. Also understanding many situations, particularly within organizations where COVID means that the processes and procedures that we were following before might be different, or might have changed, or might need to change. And again, understanding where change has happened, particularly if people don't fly into a particular airport very often, for example, and then there's lots of airports we've been doing lots of different airfield works, and that's changed things, and there are loads of examples. I'm sure you've got many more yourselves. And then and ironically, when we talk about the staying safe part, effectively the encourage people to follow recognized processes, etc., is basically a box marked compliance at a really fundamental level. And then the next box about knowing your risks and mitigating them effectively as part of a resilient management system effectively is safety management. And I'm looking forward to the discussion shortly, because we had one of our webinars last Friday, and Maxime, I know we had Wouters, who's on the discussion in a minute. We had lots of good debate about the link between compliance and safety and the two together. And again, sharing our thoughts about the common understanding of how that fits together. And then ultimately, as part of the campaign, is how we set a culture of trust that encourages reporting and for people to talk openly about safety and well-being, and not just within organizations, but also particularly one of the big things we've been opening up in these conversations is between regulators as well, and other, it's across the industry, and how can we support each other through these challenging times. And sometimes those conversations are quite difficult, and the more we can kind of embrace those conversations, the better, hopefully. So this is what we've been doing now, and we're looking particularly into next year with our Conversation Aviation series, in focusing particularly towards, we have an EPAS safety promotion task on supporting effective SMS implementation. So we'll have these different 4-week cycles where the first 3 weeks we'll have various LinkedIn posts and social media to kind of get discussion going, and then a 30-minute video podcast with different guests, and then the final week of this 4-week cycle being a live webinar, hopefully with lots of interaction and lots of discussion. And the key areas we're looking at within that for next year, as well as then through this will be lots of other operational topics and challenges that we're going to be working on, is then what do we mean by effective safety management? We see lots of process and lots of things happening, but do we really understand what it is we're trying to do with all these processes, risk assessments and all these other pieces of paper and documents and things that we create. And the same is true, and again, I'm not talking just about industry, I'm talking also about that discussion with regulators as well, and with each other. And then how do we establish a positive safety culture that encourages open conversations about safety and well-being? And again, there's lots of talk about well-being and psychological safety, but really, how do we do that within the context of our safety management systems in a way that actually makes sense, is scientifically good for us and our people, and doesn't become another box. A lot of people we see, they talk about well-being, it's like yogurt and yoga almost, where you put that in that box and it becomes something else rather than being an inherent part of organizational safety management. Then we're also covering areas such as feeding your management system, hopefully kind of a lot of discussion about occurrence reporting, FDM and other things, support on how we can investigate occurrences more effectively, how we can take the right actions and then use the right tools to monitor the effectiveness of safety, and then subjects like proactive risk management. And then we will also be doing some specific work, particularly on SMS, in design, production and maintenance, and that new area that SMS starts moving into. And as I say, there'll be lots of other operational topics. Dominique talked about many of them in her part of the presentation, with things like EFVS implementation, continued support to RRLD, the new fuel management rules. There's lots of discussion about, we've been doing a lot of support to flight to training in terms of evidence-based training in the more commercial sense, but how can the business community potentially take advantage of some of the benefits of an EBT-like approach without being tied up in knots by the process of EBT itself. So there's lots of interesting areas, and I think particularly with Johan and Karina, we've really established this collaboration now that has always been very good, but I think we've really kind of started to harness that really effectively. So a huge thanks to everybody who's kind of joined in these different activities and some of the discussions we've had over the last few months on how, as a community, we can support that. So thanks very much. Are there any questions that you have on any of the material that Dominique and I presented?
I don't see any questions. And I just like to remind everyone to either use the Q&A function to ask questions directly to the panels, or the chat function. We'll keep an eye on that as well, which is viewable by everyone. Okay, there is a question. You mentioned a number of materials, John, and I think you said it. Mentioned it quickly. So what's the best way for the operators to get hold of some of the material you've already that you mentioned?
Perhaps the easiest way is if I quickly share my screen again, I can actually show this on the community site. Might be the easiest way of doing this. So if you type EASA Aerops community into Google, then this is the page you get. Now, what you can actually do is you can link either a social media account, or if you already have use your accounts to get updates and be able to log into the EASA main website, the same applies then to the community site. So effectively, you can go in and view it like you can any other website, or you can be a kind of a logged in member, which means also then you can interact with the material that we have. So what we have here, actually have a GA, an Aerops, a general aviation, and a rotorcraft community. So particularly if you also have rotorcraft in your operations, there's a whole also pile of resources there just for the rotorcraft community. So there are different ways of viewing these kinds of things, but if you click on the safety resources element here, then we have one thing we do have is a monthly latest news that promotes all of the new things that have happened kind of in the world of EASA in the previous month. We have here the well-being resources. So if I click on that, what you then get is some different well-being resources here. So there's material on looking after yourself, managing others, and also particularly for individuals, managing the impact on your career and how you can kind of support, particularly for people who've been maybe furloughed or whatever. So then particularly if you go into the looking after yourself element, then you get to watch me talking about well-being, and then people can select their different activities that they do. So if you go to flight crew, for example, then what you can then do is access the different flight crew, in this case specific resources. So these are the different well-being topics we have material on in terms of activities. There's lots of career support material, diet, exercise, even links to finance for people in that situation, mental health, relationships, skills, sleep. So these are the core areas of the biopsychosocial model of well-being that the community has been developing. So there's these kinds of materials, and then similarly all the material on the ramp up campaign is then here in this ramp up, be ready, stay safe campaign area, and similarly, oh, there we go. Again, you can click various different resources. So again, we have types of organizations. So if you wanted to go into Aerops here, for example, then we have various different downloads materials. We have the full ramp up campaign, there's posters, there's presentations that we got from different organizations in the safety week, and particularly here's the different resources for those. And then similarly, if you want all the other kinds of material that we also have this safety topics A to Z material here. So we have, for example, one of the things we did was work on wildlife and hazard management, and there's a whole guide here that we developed as a ramp-up guide on wildlife hazard management that you can download at the end here if that's a particular risk that you're concerned about. But we basically have this A to Z, so people can go in and pick all sorts of different topics: flight data management, monitoring, human factors refresher, etc.
It's a great asset, and if I'm correct, I find it useful. If you register, you can also get automatic notifications when something is updated and so on. On a similar topic, yes, there is a question on how do you see E-Vetos fitting into the EBAA safety community, and maybe that
for us and not directly to you at the ERSA, how it fits in with the EBA. And I'd just like to mention in that respect that we now have Corina as the AAM Advanced Air Mobility file owner, and we are moving in that direction. So we will, as EBA, we definitely see E-Vetos fitting in the future. So with those two questions, and also a big thanks to both of you, Dominique and John, to set the scene for the next session by giving a bit of the background on what's coming in the form of regulation and new tools, safety enhancement tools like EVFS and so on. I'd like to have you keep you because both of you are on the next panel. It's even so that John will be the moderator, and Dominique will be with us, and we will be joined by Maxime Wouters from ASL Jet Netherlands, where he's the safety manager, Stan Medved, the EBA Safety Committee Chairman, and also the Director of Aviation for Shell Aircraft. We have Simon Evers, the Training and Standards Manager at Shell Aviation as well, and Samo Kramberger, Flight Safety Manager at Globair. Welcome to you all. And John, I hand it over to you to moderate this really interesting session that I think will engage the audience, and I'll be monitoring together with you the Q&A.
Thanks, Johan, and hopefully we'll have a really interesting discussion. So we actually did do a kind of test discussion, and ironically, when we had the discussion last week, like everything, when we've done our own webinars and things, we always wish we'd hit record on the practice discussions, because then, ironically, they're so much great value whenever you have these conversations. So hopefully we can have a similarly great discussion here with the different panel members, and thanks to everybody for joining. I think we've got a fantastic spread of people, and just in terms of setting the scene on the past year, and particularly since the last conference that I was lucky enough to join as well. Obviously, as we've heard from various people in the keynote speeches at the beginning, in the most part, business aviation has seen in some cases a fast increase in traffic in some areas, but certainly has, there's been lots of challenges, perhaps while in a different way to other parts of the system. This fast increase of traffic in some areas has been a real, a blessing and a bonus, but at the same time brought with it and operational challenges and things as a community you have to deal with. Added to that, of course, and we're obviously from an ERSA perspective very aware of that, is you have the challenge of then dealing with a continually evolving regulatory landscape, and particularly for smaller organizations, we appreciate there's a real challenge in doing that. And then just to make things even slightly more complicated, you also then have to deal with the implementation of the continuing and the always changing health regulations and the health measures that are not, whilst we have the ERSA Aviation Health Safety Protocol, for the most part, even in the EU, the health measures themselves are something for a national competency and a national activity. There's been more and more kind of Europe-wide collaboration over time, but particularly for you as a community, that's been a huge challenge. And I talked about this ramp-up campaign, but as we say, particularly I think for you as a community, it's this controlled evolution, hopefully to a positive future that takes advantage of all of the future opportunities, or current and future opportunities, for this amazing part of the industry that does so many amazing things, you know, and meets so many different needs in so many inspiring ways. And we want to start this discussion, first of all, by looking at some of the challenges and successes and the particular kind of solutions and successes that have come with those challenges. And I'd like to start perhaps by asking Dominique, from an EASA perspective. You know, you talked about some of the things in the presentation that EASA have been doing, but it'd be great to get your thoughts initially on, you know, some of this, particularly to give, I think, the operational community a flavour of some of the certification challenges that you and your team have been dealing with in supporting the OEMs with conversion to cargo and safe transport of vaccines and all sorts of other things, and patients as well. It'd be great to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, John. Yes, coming back to when we were forced to all go through the lockdown here in EASA, the business team were already very busy in trying to support the OEM, as you said, on certifying the new design feature to ensure safety for the future. Working on aircraft type certification that were ongoing, where they committed delivery to their customer. So we had at the time already a very high level of activities. And when the COVID came, we were all expecting there will be a slowdown in the activities, and on the contrary, this is not what we have experienced within EASA. With the same resources, we had still to support design changes, but at the same time, we had to face new kind of demands in terms of design change, like we need to convert the aircraft into cargo because those were the only type of activity that was ongoing on the first 3 months, and then convert as well some business jet activities into patient transport, and including some stretchers with biocontainment chambers, because we have the COVID patients to be transported, and all these kind of project that came on to support the our national aviation authorities, all the member states that we needed to support were had-on activities on top of the already, I would say, a full bag that we had at the time. So that was particularly challenging for the certification team for business jet. So the main message maybe is that the EASA never stopped during COVID-19, and on the contrary, it has doubled its activities. And I'm talking here only about certifications, but the whole EASA agency flight standard with the return to normal has done other activities that were not necessarily anticipated. So, and during the same period, we were working on the new rules, the new implementations of the rules that I've presented before. So I'm glad to have today the opportunity to express that we've been there with you during the period, and it's the first time as well that we connect the certification team working on design safety and product safety directly linked to the customer, the end user.
Fantastic, thanks for that insight, Dominique. And maybe on the operational side now, if I could turn to you, Maxime, what's some of the challenges you've been dealing with and some of the solutions you've had to those?
Well, thanks, John, and thanks, Ebaa, for setting up the summit. Too bad we could meet in Cologne. I think it would have been a great opportunity to meet
for sure.
again. Well, a lot has been said already, I think, and I believe the other operators will probably confirm what we have observed. Dominique, you just said that EASA didn't stop during COVID. Well, we noticed that because indeed we had to continue to comply with regulatory changes, which I believe is an important challenge for business jet operators, especially in those challenging times of COVID, whereas at the beginning, no one really knew what was going to happen. No one really knew how to react to such a pandemic. I think we all looked for solutions in a very innovative way at the beginning, which is kind of the DNA of business aviation as such. as you said as well, business aviation never really stopped during the pandemic. But we had to reinvent ourselves. And then all of a sudden, everybody started to publish guidance material and supporting material. And it was kind of difficult to know where to refer to. You have those national regulations, you have health and sanitary measures, you have the EASA guidelines, you have ICAO guidelines, you have IATA guidelines. And then on the top, you have private companies also publishing guidelines for business travelers and so on. So it was kind of a difficult exercise to navigate through that, although we were from the beginning kind of convinced that business aviation would bounce back, and it would bounce back rapidly, probably more rapidly than legacy carriers or low-cost carriers. But we certainly did not expect such a bounce. You know, EASA talks about return to normal operations, and to us, since the beginning of the year, it was much more than just a return to normal operations. It was a surge into the demand for business aviation and a surge in operations, which was kind of hard to manage. I'm being annoyed by a fly here, I'm sorry. Gotta keep it. So it was difficult. One of the things we found useful, if I can link that to one of the latest regulations which we had to implement, and I'll be honest, I was kind of skeptical at the beginning because I thought this is yet another regulation of the type tick in the box. It's peer support. We've implemented it company-wide, so we decided not to go just for the pilots as it's required by the regulations, but just to offer it to everyone in the company. And so we had to make a selection of people representing all the entire company, all the departments, including camo people, cabin crew people, administration, you name it. And it's been used. Since we've launched it, we've had requests coming in. We've had a few cases. Some of them ended up in a very positive way. So that was one of the surprises, I would say, of the pandemic at the beginning. And I think the challenges we're facing now is to combine the effects of the return to normal operations, being a surge in the demand for business aviation and in the demand for flights, with those systemic, operational and safety issues, one of them being keeping up with the regulations because the workload is increasing. In the meantime, you have to look up for your increased operations. But on the other hand, you have the authorities on your back, making sure that you still comply within your regulations. And where I'm seeing a gap right now, from our perspective, is that I think we're fully in line with your presentation, John. I think we're fully in line with what EASA is promoting. But where I see a gap is between EASA, the National Aviation Authorities, and the operators. And this is where I sometimes sense a cultural gap with regards to how safety is perceived. And the fact that sometimes maybe it's still a bit too authoritarian, I would say, from certain national aviation authorities, whereas they approach you with the EASA umbrella of saying, we have to audit you, we have to take those boxes because we are going to be audited by EASA. And I don't think this is really in line with what EASA is promoting itself, being a risk-based regulation. This is not what we always feel as an operator. But the systems we've put in place, they're working. COVID had probably a lot of negative effects, but they also had a lot of positive effects. It pushed us to reinvent ourselves, to implement new means of communication, to implement new means of exchanging data, to meet more often, even though virtually, and to probably change the way you approach certain issues with your people within your organization. So I think it's an ongoing process, it's an ongoing challenge. And indeed, we're trying to keep up with everything because the surge is there, the demand is there, and we need to make sure that we'll be able to reply to it without jeopardizing safety in any sense.
Thanks for that. I think you covered lots of really interesting topics, and we're going to delve into some of those in a little bit more detail later. I was thinking maybe it was worth mentioning, actually, after we had the discussion last week, I spoke to some of my colleagues in flight standards, and something they were doing a lot of before COVID, they've been doing more, as much as they can with the remote kind of meeting possibilities they've had, but having more of these standardization workshops and kind of discussing between authorities and EASA some of these common standardization and application challenges, and particularly the skill sets of inspectors, for example, as things move to a more risk-based approach. So I know from the colleagues in flight standards, there's lots of work going on with the national authorities in many different areas there. So it was worth mentioning that. Samo, maybe if I can come to you and maybe you could tell us a bit about some of the challenges that you've been dealing with.
Thank you very much, John. I'll try to be brief. I'll take us back to year 2020, March, when it all started, you know, and how we addressed this in Globair. I mean, I'm the safety manager, then I keep a close contact with our post-order flight ops and compliance. And like Maxime was saying, you know, safety and compliance, they're close together. But basically, just to summarize up these 2 years of what's been going on is it's a constant development and changing of procedures according to the pandemic, how it was going. So there was a peak, everything was closing, you know, there was a demand went down, and then suddenly everyone wanted to fly again, and there was a lot of converters, so the business was back on again. How we were doing this, basically in the company, they were managing national regulations, following them in the ops department. Then there was a separate team, basically just in the safety department, developing the COVID guidelines, COVID procedures, which, like Maxime was saying, we were relying on national and local authorities and everyone. But the first initial revisions were basically developed by ourselves, and we've seen a lot of success with it. So as the pandemic was going, we were basically tightening the procedures or then lightening the procedures. And now where we are, you know, and in addition with all the other implementations that have been going on, like PSP, the Pilot Peer Support Program, and LDTA, and those implementations, we were quite busy, in addition to the flying, which we also try to do. But I have to say that the changes are very possible. I mean, positive, and we've seen great success with it. And what I can suggest to everyone is just in the companies, just try to work together. I mean, the closer the safety and compliance are together, the easier the job is, you know, because if one is lacking a bit on the other side, then it gets complicated, I'll say like this. But this would be my brief summary. I'm sure we'll go into more detail later on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Simon, if I could turn to you from your side, what kind of things have you been dealing with in slightly different contexts, type of organization, but yeah, I'm sure many similar challenges.
Sure. I think, you know, earlier you mentioned, you know, doing this sprint, but over a marathon, and that's kind of definitely been the last couple of years, you know, with peer support and all of this as well. These have been really, you know, positive things here. And kind of on the flight line a little bit, connecting a bit with your evidence-based training and how that fits into sort of the business aviation fold. Of course, we're not so big like an airline or anything like this where we have this huge amount of data. But at the start of the pandemic, you know, we had to recreate ourselves, and we've been just doing nothing but recreating ourselves throughout this whole process. And a few years ago, we really made a really big attempt at getting TEM into the sort of, you know, threat and error management into the briefing fold for the crews, you know, including that with the flight attendant group, similar to what Maxime mentioned, with actually having that as something that you include with everybody, right, in the ops planning stages, but also with the flight attendants in the crew briefings and everything. And that TEM approach sort of, it sort of, if you look at an SMS approach, that you've got your plan, you've got your do, you've got your check and your act, and that TEM sort of fit, you know, in the conventional state, fits right into that do process. And by having to recreate ourselves, we actually were able to sort of, you know, take the model of TEM and put that into the planning stages as well, you know. So if we had you know, something new come up where all of a sudden we have this long range trip and you know, we're going somewhere that we haven't been for a long time, or it's somewhere that we've never been, you know, what can we do to sort of manage some of those areas? And that's definitely a risk-based approach, but it also becomes really important in the second areas, you know, checking and then also the acting. And one of the things that we did during the FDM process at the start of the pandemic is we'd have not so many flights, and we had to do a few currency flights, and then we had a couple of very unusual events. And during the review process, we had a new FCLO, new flight crew liaison officer, lots of energy, but the template that they had to interact with with those crews, it didn't really fit. It didn't really connect, and so we knew that the crews were going to be using this TEM model at the start in their briefing to sort of look ahead here, but actually during the FCLO debrief process of saying, you know, let's take a TEM look at what happened and what the crews could sort of buy into, and that became our template moving forward, and that worked out really well, and it allowed for this loop to be connected or closed for the crews, you know, when events did come up. And it sort of led us down into having a bit of an operational framework SOP where, you know, a lot of these human factors, things that, you know, naturally are going to come up, you can sort of say, okay, this might not be verbatim SOP, but actually if you apply this sort of a framework such as threat and error management or active monitoring or any of these areas in the SOP, actually gives the crews a bit of an operational framework that they can apply when something new comes up. And, you know, by having that incorporated into that debriefing process, you know, whether it's the post-flight debrief or for the crew that they have themselves, or actually during that FCLO debrief in the events, the event review, it becomes pretty powerful, and it sort of ties the crews into it and makes them take that ownership. You know, when through some of those FCLO debriefs, we discovered you know, we would go to some of these challenging airports that in the past we flew very often. Let's say we were flying the same amount of hours, but not getting as many takeoffs and landings. And prior to this, the pandemic, Seletar was always one of these airports that we went to quite often. And then during the pandemic, it really dried up. You know, Singapore wasn't allowed to go to for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, we were allowed to go, and we figured out a way to make that happen. And we noticed after we had 3 or 4 aircraft go in over the course of about a month that we had quite a few events that we never had before. And so we had to take a look at it during that FCLO debrief and really look at sort of what those events were. We had an overbank, we had underspeed, and a high vertical rate. The aircraft was fine. There was no further issue, but it was a level 2 event for us. And during that review, you know, the crews definitely knew it, but they just weren't current with it. So we actually chose to sort of approach this as far as a bit of an EBT approach, like you mentioned earlier, and just take some time in this simulator to, you know, create a profile, create what we call an airport pilot notes that we put right into Jeppesen with reference to certain airports that might be deemed as more challenging, and actually fly that in the simulator. And that was a really effective tool. And the crews, there was no emergencies, there was nothing that happened. They just turned around, positioned themselves for it, and then they could actually fly that procedure to go in there. So it for us, we saw a decrease in the events, specifically around going into Seletar. So that's sort of an evidence-based approach to, you know, the plan, do, check, and act. But then looking at the FDM for some of that evidence, that's something that, you know, some of the business aviation operators are going to have. So take a look at that. You know, that was a really positive thing, and we've done a lot more with that.
And it sounds like that process at a kind of really practical level, you know, if I think of the kind of traditional occurrence reporting type approach, that sounds like the kind of thing that I imagine flight crew or crews in general would embrace as a kind of a little bit more positive than kind of firing in a report and waiting almost to see what the system does next. It's, you know, it becomes more real time and they can buy into that more. That
Yeah.
The kind of thing you found. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, we talk about this managing of expectations a lot. And, you know, for example, you might have a scenario where, you know, you want crews to hand fly, you know, you want them to stay proficient in the manual flying range, but, you know, they need to identify that if the workload gets too high, then maybe turning on the automation or levels of that is going to be an important thing. So we just announced at the start of our brief, you know, when will you engage the autopilot as part of that management of that that threat or the potential for that error? And it also comes into the stabilized approach. You know, when we were flying very much, we were quite proficient with stabilized approach. Everybody was getting really good at that. And then when the hours came down so much, but you know, we were sorry, not hours, but the takeoffs and landings came down so much, we get a lot higher number of unstable approaches per flights. You know, just because crews weren't so good, and you also mentioned earlier ATC pushing, all of these kinds of things, where crews weren't quite as good at timing that last selection of flap and getting the aircraft slowed down and being as, you know, efficient as possible with their speed to still be stable. And so we introduced a configuration call. So for example, you know, Flight Safety Foundation a couple of years ago talked about the stable approach and landing concept, and you know, we embrace that, but without saying you will select your final selection of flaps at this stage. You know, just by saying to the crews, it's up to you, and it may vary at different airports, but manage that expectation with the other crew member. During an FCLO debrief, you might have something where one crew member says, yeah, when were you expecting those flaps to be selected to be stable by that altitude? And without managing that expectation, you're sort of separating that cockpit there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's it's interesting to see the kind of really practical operational application of, you know, what we've been talking about in our conversation aviation thing. I'm really excited to see that, yeah, the reality of that kind of concept, you know, that you talk about there. It's really exciting.
You know, John, one other thing, and I just sort of tie this in because it sort of closes this loop a little bit. You know, we had to make kind of a funny step, and we, as we had some of these unstable approaches, people were very nervous at the start about what the industry was going to look like, where, you know, and you talk about some of the mental state of people, you know, nobody wants to be the sort of the person that's going around, this kind of a thing. You know, everybody wants to just be flying status quo and right now. And then when those unstable approaches came in, you know, we looked at it, and they could answer that. They should have done something, but we didn't see examples of that. So we actually staged a couple of go-arounds and reported that within the safety system, just to promote that awareness by some of the leadership pilots, not necessarily management, but some of the pilots that, you know, were viewed as being sort of more experienced, and having them include, you know, ATC pushed us, or we didn't manage it correctly, and just by demonstrating that was okay and that was supported by management or supported by the company. So it's kind of a small little reset that we needed to do, and it had really positive influence and impact.
I think that's fantastic to kind of see those examples, and like you say, the importance of leadership setting the example and kind of, you know, saying to the operational staff, hey, these kinds of things are natural and they're things that you shouldn't be worried about, and the more we can talk about them and, you know, resolve them together, I think that's really interesting. And perhaps that's a good time to come across to you, Stan. And, you know, obviously you've got kind of two side hats to this. Is one obviously within Shell itself, and then the other one is the role you have within EBAA as the chair of the safety committee as well. You know, what kind of things have you seen that you know you've had as challenges, and, you know, also then in terms of solutions as well?
I think you know, very much when COVID first struck, and you know, a number of people already mentioned it, you know, people thought the wheels were going to fall off the industry initially. People were worried about their jobs, they were worried about their health, their families, the economy, everything. So a lot of stresses in there. And so, you know, the well-being and the peer support programs, I think, couldn't have come at a better time, really. And so a great initiative by EASA to promote it. And it's perfectly, you know, achievable in a small organisation, as Maxime pointed out. Again, you might feel a bit skeptical about those sort of things, but with a lot of the programs, I think what COVID has demonstrated is you don't have to be a big operator to do a lot of the things. The other thing which might be a bit controversial, and Maxime, I think, alluded to it, you know, being compliant doesn't mean you're going to be safe. You can comply with the regulation, but if that's all you're doing and you're not putting it together into an operating framework or actually looking at the intent of that, the regulation you need to comply with, you're just ticking a box. And we see that sometimes with operators with their FDM programs. They'll have FDM, but they actually don't do anything with it. And you know, it shows that what I've seen amongst a whole bunch of operators during COVID is that despite all the challenges of COVID, people have been able to do some pretty amazing things with FDM, with the peer support programs and other initiatives as well. So that's been really, really, really encouraging. You know, what we also have seen, I think the aviation industry has been very resilient and has been able to support us as we've been ramping up and surging with the activity levels. But it's some of the other non-aviation support industries and services we use have almost been falling into COVID excuses. You know, can't supply this, there's delays, and some of it is outside of their control, and that's been quite frustrating for us in particular, where we haven't been able to get the support that we need. But then we've had to find innovative ways of making that work, whether it's IT support or other support services that we might use. I mean, during the pandemic, we were able to take delivery of a brand new aircraft right at the start of the pandemic and get it into service very quickly, and that was because of support from some of the regulators who were really willing to bend over backwards to get those aircraft into service. And we also were able to sell 2 aircraft and deliver them to the United States during COVID. And that was despite all the restrictions in place at the time. And again, so how did that come about? It wasn't by accident. We talk about operational excellence, and really it's things that have been happening over many, many years. It's not just one procedure or one process, but it's a whole integrated framework of activity that's allowed us to, and the industry to be resilient and adapt and reinvent itself. And that's something we've heard a lot from, at the safety committee from a lot of the operators. People have been reinventing themselves and being really successful. And so if you look at it, what's made people successful and operators successful? And I think it is that concept of operational excellence.
Fantastic, thanks, Anna. It was really interesting to hear all those different examples, and particularly talking about the element of, as you said, the compliance is one thing, and that's where particularly, and even in the ramp up campaign, we kind of, we're really trying to highlight the 2 sides of compliance and risk management, rather than, kind of the assumption I certain people kind of make that, well, if I am compliant, then I will be, by default, be safe. And, particularly when we have an industry that is as safe as it is, it's quite easy to potentially be sucked into the fact that we haven't had any negative events, that everything's going to be great moving forward. But particularly, then if we move on now and look particularly at the risk-based approach that we've talked about, and this, threat and error management, and all of these things that we bring in as part of our safety management system. And there are a number of individual areas that it'd be interesting to touch on. Perhaps, I come back to you, Dominique, and you talked about in the presentation and particularly about the certification of new technical advancements to reduced operational risks. It'd be really interesting to kind of see, which ones of those you see as the most the biggest focus at the moment, and has lots of big benefits to improve things going forward.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was very interesting, all the input that was just presented, and as we said, could safety had a pause during these periods, same as health could not pause. Then we keep on working on new technology for the future, because we are preparing the future as well. New threats are coming in, new risk as well. And what we are focusing now is, as I presented during the presentation, is really the technology that would help the flexibility of the business aviation. The enhanced flight vision system is what my team is currently really focusing on to be ready for certifications, so that these new features will be available for improving the awareness, crew awareness, and as well during the low visibility operation. So these are the main items: the enhanced flight vision system down to land, aiming to, as I said, to reduce diverting and or go around in case of low visibility.
And certainly one of the things we've been doing a lot of, particularly with Johan, but with you as a wider community, is how we can better support then your implementation of these new rules and activities, and how can we share lessons learned across the community and all of these things. And hopefully we've learned a lot of lessons already. There's still a long way to go in improving how we do that collaboration to really support you effectively, particularly when it comes to understanding implementation of the rules, and what you talked about, Maxine, particularly about what that looks like when you go to the national authority to talk about a particular topic, particularly something where it's new. And I think RRLD is quite a good example of that. And Simon, if I come to you now, perhaps when we were talking last week, you were talking particularly about some of the challenges you've had around long range international flights. It'd be interesting to hear a bit more about that and to share that with the panel and with the community.
Sure. So maybe 4 years ago, we picked up a program called SAFE, and it's basically uses an algorithm to sort of combine both transient fatigue, cumulative fatigue, and circadian by looking at the schedules. And when we first got the program, to be totally honest, we didn't really know what to do with it. It spat out a bunch of different numbers, and it seemed quite Greek. Although it's pretty obvious, the longer the flight, the higher the score it would produce here. So for a while we studied the data, and we had interns in, and it just didn't really get us anywhere. And just to come back again to sort of connecting into the crews or the people that are involved, what we ended up doing was, for a certain number of flights, or for certain flights, we wanted to validate these scores because we just didn't have any information on what that looked like. So we actually produced these, we would run the schedule, or the proposed schedule that was going to be there, and we would produce a fatigue risk score, or at the time we called it SAFE, a SAFE score, and then that we would get the crews to validate it based on what that index might look like. So for example, if you had a score of 4.0, that would look like a little tired, or less than fresh. And then that 4.0 could move up to a 5.0, which is moderately tired, let down. And then if you got higher than that, that would become something that was, extremely tired, very difficult to concentrate. And, as a long range operator, we know that fatigue risk is definitely a big issue. It's a increased reaction time. Of course, I'm reading off here, but increased reaction time, reduced attentiveness, impaired memory, or a withdrawn mood. And none of these things are going to be, very good at the end of a, ultra long flight going into a place like Seletar. And I just use Seletar as an example because we talked about it already. So we kind of validated the scores, and through that we recognized that below 8 hours or below a score of 4.0, there isn't really an anticipated fatigue risk. Of course, you can still have certain situations where the hotel's under construction or something completely outside of your control. What you might call unanticipated fatigue might show up, but during the planning stages, you know that you're primarily dealing with those 3 types of fatigue. So below 8 hours, it didn't really matter any time of the day, but over 8 hours, there was a potential for some medium or high level fatigue risk. So we then were able to further break it down between these scores of 4 and 4.8, and we would call that medium risk. And then we've got a 4.8 up to a 5.3, and we wouldn't do anything over a 5.3. And so during the first step of implementing or working with SAFE, we had to realize right away that it's really important what terms you use. And so it's not a SAFE score, it's a fatigue risk score. And as soon as you sort of apply those correct terminology on things, then people are going to have an understanding of what it is, whereas if I just repeat it's a SAFE score, then I'm not really connected to it. But as the person on the front lines, if it's a fatigue risk score, then I can directly understand a little bit more about what we're talking about. So terminology becomes really important there. And we realized during the planning stages that our operations team could plan a flight with a score of up to 4.8 within the flight duty time limitations, and we would have medium fatigue risk, so that would be produced on the score on the trip sheet or on the plan of action, depending on what you call it at different operators, of what the intended trip would be. And so you first off identify that you're in an awareness stage. You've got to let the crews understand that this is a heightened level of potential fatigue. It's medium, so we're going to do a few things to give you the tools to be more aware of it. First, we're going to train you, which is a really important part because you've got to have that awareness. You've got to give them some tools. So we actually did some nutrition courses during some of the lower flying times, to get crews to understand the impacts of eating more appropriately, the use of alcohol, all of this kind of stuff. And we're not necessarily controlling all of everybody's downtime, except just creating that awareness. And then the last thing is, just by producing that score and having the crews themselves that have validated that, they knew what they were connected to. And as soon as we went over a score of 4.8, regardless of how far within that flight duty time limitation it was, then actually the crew had to be part of that active management. So potentially we would add another crew member. Potentially we would have some sort of a strategy, maybe have the crew in a hotel close to the airport the night before the flight, or in some very extreme cases, have another crew come in and prepare the aircraft. But it also became part of our deviation process. So if we were, for example, the only way to do a trip was maybe an extension or an exceedance of that standard flight duty time limitation, we could actually use the fatigue risk scoring system to actually validate whether it was or to give a crew an understanding ahead of time of what that potential fatigue risk could look like. So that further to that, it developed also into looking at a more opportune way of reducing actually how much rest on the ground. I think for a lot of people, if we're inside of our circadian rhythm and we fly all night tonight and we get in somewhere and we have our 6 hours of sleep, because have a transient fatigue scenario because we just spent the entire night awake, but the next morning, we'll have a good night's sleep, but the regulations may ask you to have enough time off equal to the duty that you just had, and by 1 o'clock the next night you're ready and fit for duty. But this might actually not make that much sense. So by using a validation of fatigue risk scoring, it actually put us in a more powerful position to say, what, we're going to manage the fatigue like this or like that by using these scorings. And if we talk a little bit about operational excellence, some of these things end up being an operational advantage. And so by going down that lane of trying to promote or try to pursue operational excellence, it's that operational advantage that actually is maybe in some cases the difference between, our competition, which maybe is airline travel, versus what we can do as business aviation operators, right?
And it's really, I was really interested. There's so many great points there. Hopefully everybody got lots from that. And one of the interesting things kind of evolving to perhaps come to Maxine in a second to talk about what he was saying about peer support and the benefits of some of those things. It was really interesting, as you were saying, about when you're trying to get a competitive advantage, as an organization, and obviously maintain the levels of safety, etc. It's been really interesting as we've been doing more and more work, particularly on well-being. And actually, interestingly, there was a project we found out about here at Cologne Bonn Airport, where they'd actually got somebody who, a sort of a sports psychologist, effectively, to work with different teams around the airport to kind of say, well, what does it mean to the baggage handlers at Cologne Bonn Airport to be on their A game? And they would have, it was really interesting they actually have a promotional video to highlight some of the things they did. But it's really fascinating to see, baggage handlers and firefighters at the airport, different work kind of groups of people talking about how all of these different areas, different focus areas that perhaps we didn't consider as an industry before, helps firstly their well-being, but actually how that improves their operational performance, which is, I think, quite an interesting one, is how you link all of these different things into into our goal of operational excellence. And like I say, Maxine, maybe I come to you you talked a bit about the peer support there. Is, can you tell us a bit more about how that fits then into the operational performance of your flight crews and your organization generally? You said that it was expanded now across the organization.
Well, yeah, I think it was pretty obvious to us from the beginning that if we wanted to implement peer support, we would not only do it for pilots, because we thought the issues that peer support deals with are applicable to anyone in the company, regardless of your position, regardless of the department you work for. It did, however, highlight, and this is also linked to the pandemic, it did highlight somehow that we still had some silos to break in the company, between those, I will say, those AOC managed department, those which are under, quite a heavy regulatory framework, and those non-AOC departments being, for instance, sales, administration. To the eyes of the authorities and to the eyes of EASA, those departments do not exist. However, they do interact with everyone, including with our crew members. What we saw during the pandemic, and this is kind of different to what Simon explained, out of the 50 aircraft we operate, I think that 90% is within Europe, maybe the Middle East, Northern Africa. I would say that 10% is long haul flying. So the kind of fatigue that we are encountering is more stress related. And we used to say, in business aviation, expect the unexpected. Well, it has never been as true as now, because especially since the recovery period, the schedule is hectic. And this is what our crew had to face on a daily basis. Every mission was changed or happened to change last minute, whereas it was a destination. The number of legs, the number of passengers, the fuel calculations, possibly the health requirements pertaining to a particular destination. So, and it all ultimately falls down to the crew members, because they're the ones who has to deal with that firsthand. And so what we started seeing during the summer was an increased ratio of fatigue reports coming in. Not because of the amount of hours flown, but because of everything that goes around the flying and the unexpected that would pop up all the time. We had crews departing on the 2-leg missions with a night stop schedule in Barcelona, so they're kind of happy. And then, oh Lord, they land in Barcelona, they get a call from ops. Oh, good news, guys, we've got 3 more legs for you tonight. And here you go again. And pandemic also implied a lot of new extra workload on crew members. Cleaning the aircraft, disinfecting the aircraft, making sure that it was correctly disinfected. At the same time, catering was arriving at the aircraft while they were cleaning. I mean, it's nothing new, but it was exacerbated probably during the pandemic. And this is how the first request for peer support came in. We had a lot of people saying, I'm just having a hard time dealing with it. It's been a lot. And, with those flight and duty time limitations, you have those 2 local days off with 2 local nights when you've reached your maximum duties over 7 consecutive days. Well, sometimes those local days off are not necessarily at home. So it is a hard time sometimes for the pilots to cope with that. And it also implied a lot of extra workload for all the people in the office, because the aircraft flew much more than expected. So it had impact on maintenance. We also had to introduce, I think, during the pandemic, we've introduced 9 to 10 new aircraft in the fleet because the business was booming. So that was a lot of extra workload. So all in all, this is how we thought, okay, peer support indeed comes at the right time. And it has been used. We decided to do it internally. We thought, we have quite an international company. We're far from being as big as NetJet, but we're touching different cultures. Belgians, we have a few French people now in the company. We have Dutch people, German people. We thought we're not going to buy one of those, rate systems that are ready to use that you can just apply to and call whenever you need them. We thought it was better to really have our own people to offer peer support, because we think there's a cultural bond between the people in our company, that they know exactly what the issue is. And it has proven to be very efficient. I'm actually quite surprised that we had so many requests over the first couple of months of people openly requesting peer support, either for themselves or for other people in the company. And the reaction was very positive. I have to say. So that was really I would say a good surprise, that it was so well accepted and that we immediately found enough candidates to represent all the departments of the company as well. So that was a great move, I think.
Yeah, and it seems really positive. I've heard that story, that similar situation from people across the industry who've been doing peer support, is that, you know, there's been lots of people in organizations happy to come forward to be part of this program and setting it up and running it. And we've done some webinars with quite a few people now who are involved in that, and it's been really interesting to hear their stories. And it was particularly interesting also, I really love how you linked into that also, you know, some of these new challenges that we've all faced, and I think that kind of follows on really nicely perhaps to you, Samo. And when we were talking last week, you were talking about, you know, some of these new challenges that you faced, and, you know, it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about some of these things, and particularly something that we've seen as so important across the industry is sharing these different challenges with the wider community. We had somebody on one of our webinars who said, you know, he thought he was the only one facing this problem until, you know, normally we'd all meet at events and conferences and get to talk about these and realize we weren't alone. But actually, you know, he said there was one problem he was dealing with for a year before he happened to bump into somebody from another airline in a supermarket that he knew, and they talked about it and realized they were the same. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about that from you, Samo.
Like John, yeah, like you're saying, until you talk about it with someone, you think you're the only one having the issue. What I would like to start off here with is what I am a huge fan of is the integrated safety management system. Not just look at it from different points. And why I'm bringing this up, it's going to be very clear, because I'm going to put two open topics which were issues with training and currency during the pandemic and how we solved it. And now with this integrated safety management system, basically how, if you have a part, how this integrates in the company. And for an example, what we were faced with was the issue of currency. I mean, as you know, Glover operates just Mustangs, and the only SIM is in Europe is in UK, so UK shut borders. We had to find a solution. And actually, with the risk-based approach, with the risk assessments, we've proven to the authority that we can do it on the aircraft, and that was a successful story. Then the second one was issues. You know, I know the majority of companies is doing yearly trainings, currencies, and I'm sure other operators were facing the same issues with currencies and updates. So basically, there was an ALBO which was approved again. We were quite lucky on that. I mean, there was a lot of additional work, and why I did say integrated safety management system, because in the end, if you take a look at it, it intervenes. And when you have a larger scope, I mean, now with 20 aircraft and about 140 people employed, what I can say, everyone is very open to the occurrence reporting, and we're not just using the ASRs, but general health and safety. And basically what we try to do, get as much data in, and then look at the heat maps and where it's originating, and how, you know, you can get a similar picture as with peer support, except here it's a bit more personal, because to be honest, in a company with 130, 150 employees, it's very hard to make everything completely anonymous. So this is where the top management support comes in. If they show commitment for, like you were discussing before, like Simon was saying, this what everyone wants in the safety world, you know, in commercial aviation, not just safety departments, is improvements. And once this is shown from top down, I'm sure you will get it. Another thing here will be like John, we were going on basically the operational issues during the increase of traffic, especially from May on, was possible fatigue. And before before the pandemic, we were on a stable 6.4. Then during the pandemic, because of issues with positionings and like others were saying before, we were operating this floating base model. So we did the survey, and what's the most challenging day of business jet pilot is the day 1 positioning on, and the day 6 in our case is the positioning off. So what we did is we shortened the roster to 6-4, got back on the 6-4, and allow people for the 4 off days. And I mean, the fatigue was almost eliminated. This was a great way to do it. So what I can suggest is, stability and proactiveness. I mean, if you tackle the issues in front, if you try to predict the tricky areas, you should have success with it. But another thing was fixed pairings, which we also applied, and as much as possible, which now onwards are not in force anymore because there is actually no need for it. And yeah, this would be my thoughts on the operational risks, current ones.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Maybe if I come to you, Stan, for your thoughts in terms of some of the evolving risks that you've seen in the last few months.
No, thanks, John. I mean, some of the evolving risks, really, a lot of it was around the public health and country entry challenges and requirements that we had. It was a moving target. It was just different, not just month to month, but sometimes week to week, or even day to day. You could go to a location yesterday, go tomorrow, and the requirements are different. And I know for our operations team that were scheduling and planning all the flights, it was not uncommon to reschedule, replan a trip 7 or 8, 9, 10 times. So the workload was phenomenally increased for them. And so, really had to be adaptable and prepared to change. And so what we did, we ended up looking at all the different processes and steps that we have in planning a trip, and decided which things we don't have to do or not do. They might have been nice to do in the past. So, how can we move the burden away from people that were being stressed because of their workload or increased workload? And so we've done that, but then we've also saw in some places we went too far. And so we've actually had to go back to doing some things. So again, it's just a need to be adaptable and keep reassessing what we do and not afraid to go back or make changes and also communicate with people. And I see one of the challenges that we're facing now is, I call it COVID fatigue. In the first year, people saw this as a challenge. They wanted to get on with it. They were pleased that they could contribute and make a difference in supporting the businesses that we were supporting in the company. But now we've gotten to a point where people have had enough. I think we've all had enough of COVID, really. But as we've seen just in the past week or two, it's still here, and we're seeing new restrictions coming in. So how do we get around that? We've already spoken about peer support, talking about communication, getting people to be part of the solution. And I think business aviation is a wonderful sector to be in, because we all need to be part of the solution. You just can't hand the problem to somebody else or to a base manager or to an operations department. We have to be self-sufficient. When we go away with the aircraft, and particularly on long-range trips, we're on our own. And how do we manage that risk and maintain the dispatch reliability and the health and safety of our people and our passengers? One of the things that we found to be quite or very useful is to engage with government authorities and with the regulator to come up with bespoke solutions. For example, in some cases where we need, the requirements are to test the crews before departure to bring the aircraft back into Europe, back into the Netherlands. But what do we do if we have a crew member who tests positive and we're in Sri Lanka or in the Philippines? We can't fly the aircraft back, and we're leaving a crew member in a place that might have an overstressed health system. So we were able to put into place a testing regime on arrival in airside here. So again, the message there is if you can think of an alternative way of doing something, engage with the regulator, engage with the authority, and they may not agree with you, but our experiences have been willing to help to find solutions.
And I think that's been one of the biggest lessons, I've taken from all of these different points, and it links very nicely to our concept of conversation aviation that we've been trying to encourage, is that whatever subject it is, the more we can talk and find solutions, whether it's Maxime, as you talked about, between organizations and regulators. Simon, you were talking about the situation between within the organization and talking about operational things. Similarly with you, Samo, and similarly Stan, talking about in the wider context of how do you solve problems at this kind of global health level, which is really interesting. Before I come to you each for kind of a final thought from the panel itself, perhaps also we've got a question that I know it all came in perhaps for you, Simon, the question says, interesting hearing the idea of Shell Aviation staging a couple of go-arounds to simulate conversations. How confident you are of the best way to honestly engage your pilots in this subject area? I guess I think maybe if I interpret it's not that you're staging go-arounds necessarily, it's you're using situations and then taking them back to the simulators, if I'm right.
Yeah, we did, let's say, practice a couple of go-arounds on the line just to show that it was a relevant thing that we want people to do. And then I think in the question he says, or the person says, honesty, and maybe 3-4 years ago, there was the how are we going to deal with the aging pilot issue? And we've been really fortunate; we don't have a lot of turnover, and so we are staring down that barrel of an aging group here that will be with us, and we want everybody to be with us for a long time. And when we got everybody became quite wrapped up into the doing online trainings or online this or that, and we actually looked at it in a few areas and identified that no, some of these things need to be in classroom where you can be with your team, where you can have these conversations. And tying that back into the original question, it's about being honest. When we did our session just shortly after, a month later, it was in the classroom where we discuss our SOPs or any of the FOM changes or discuss some of the concepts behind it, then you explain it there so that people feel bought into it. So, if I've got any kind of theme on that, it's you've got to have the team that's going to be out on the line, or the team that's managing whatever, be able to own that and be really believe that they've got some control over that, or under some control of that decision making process that they're a part of.
Fantastic. Thanks for that clarification. Hopefully that helps as well for the person that asked that question. And maybe just to finish off, we've got a couple of minutes left. If I could come to each of you, first to Dominique, perhaps just with a quick kind of one thing, if there was one key takeaway from the discussion we've had and the things you've been talking about from each of you, maybe 30 seconds each. Dominique, what would yours be?
Thank you, John. And it was already mentioned by the importance of connecting with people. So I'm very glad to have been invited to this forum with the business aviation community, and to put a bit of light on the certification activity that we are doing, and that there is bees that I call them, the bees that are not making the honey, but the bees team that working on the product safety and to provide support to the high level of exigency of the business aviation. So the connections would be for me the main takeaway, and engage in the conversations. And if there is a way that we could help, then I'm sure that whether EASA or the National Aviation Authority will do so.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dominique. That was really good. And Maxime, maybe from your side?
On the first one, and that's just an advice, whenever you do an online meeting, avoid having flies in your office, because you get the whole time. So that's the first one. The second one, I think I'm in line with Dominique. I think what is key right now, that's what we see, is really communication, and it's not an easy exercise. And I mean communication both internally and externally, with your people, making sure they understand the principles of safety, making sure they understand the principle of just culture. We've touched slightly on that, but I think it is so important nowadays to make sure that people understand the fundamentals of reporting and the fundamentals of using safety data, and communicating externally, as you said, with your authorities. It is still a very difficult exercise, in my opinion, sometimes because of the cultural gap, as well as with any other aviation stakeholder. I mean, we've been able to solve many, many safety issues by just talking with people and just making sure that we were on the same page. So if you have a good communication process, if you're a good communicator and you're able to go along with people inside and outside your organization, then I think you've done already a very good job in managing any sorts of crisis as the one we've been through right now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Maxine. If I come to you, Simon, next.
Yeah, since we touched just culture, commitment comes from top down, so that's where we should start. And yeah, for a brief one, similar companies with similar issues, the more we get together, we try to solve the issues together, I think the easier it's going to be for everyone. Just because I know that a lot of us are facing similar issues, especially the ones that are operating in the same or similar segments. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. And Simon, if I come to you next.
Yeah, I guess for me, really hearing everybody's talking about this human element here. Everybody's been affected by this, by the pandemic, but also the 100 miles a minute sprint that's turned into a marathon, the COVID burnout, all of this stuff. And we've been talking so much about sort of, all of these things to introduce to protect the people or to give the people on the front lines, that ability, including management, to sort of move forward. And I think sort of really the key to operational excellence and that operational advantage is going to come through the people. So really nice to hear that. Thank you very much for a great job, John.
Fantastic. Thanks, most kind of you. And Stan, finally, if we come to you,
Yeah.
You opened at the start, so great that you finished this.
Yeah. Look, operational excellence all just comes down to the people. It really is. It's all about the people. The technical stuff is relatively easy in our line of business. It's the people side. How do we get everyone all moving in the same direction? Now Simon mentioned it's a framework approach. Operational excellence is a framework. It's not individual procedures or siloed activities. It's having a framework that's resilient enough to, we've spoken a lot about COVID today, but what's the next crisis? It might be a pandemic. It could be something else. It could be an economic crisis. But if we have a framework that builds that resilience and it covers the whole organisation, then I think we're in a much better position. And business aviation is showing it's being resilient, and it is all about the people, and it's having this framework and this adaptability. And I think we can drive exceptional safety results and outcomes through operational excellence. So thanks, John.
Thanks, Stan, and thanks to all of the panel. I think we talked about people towards the end. I think we were really privileged to have such fantastic insights from such a great range of people with such great experience. So hopefully all the attendees got a lot from that. And thanks again. And Johan, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic session. I really enjoyed listening to you all, and I'll talk maybe for half a minute or so to give the floor a chance or the attendees to ask a question. I haven't seen anyone so far. My great takeaway is to hear how the industry kind of pulled together to go through this crisis, and I hope some of the things will remain after COVID fatigue or not. Like Stan said, the people and also the flexibility that the whole industry as a whole, starting with the EASA RNO project and so on, that will keep even as we come out